Hey everyone, my name is Naxius, and I want to take a few minutes of your time to discuss video game pre-ordering and why I think in today's video game climate we should not be pre-ordering games anymore. And I hope to convince you of that by the time we end this video. Now, to get something out of the way immediately, I don't want to try and guilt you into not doing this. Frankly, it's your money, you can do with it what you want, and let's face it, there's much dumber things that you could be spending money on. The whole site of Wish exists for that reason.
Yes, give me a fucking Nick Cage sequin pillow.
But I think it's safe to first start with the history of pre-ordering. Why did it exist in the first place? And the simple answer was because everything was on physical media, whether it was game cartridges or CDs, movies, or even books, for God's sake. Everything had a physical media, which also meant there was a limited number of copies of said piece of media. So if there was a game that you wanted to play on release day or near release day, because you'd read about it in a magazine or seen commercials for it on TV, super excited, super hyped, if you didn't pre-order, there was the real possibility that you wouldn't be able to get your hands on this game for an extended period of time. It could be days, weeks, or even months depending on the popularity of said game. You think of every time a new World of Warcraft expansion came out, like Burning Crusade or Wrath or Cataclysm, when the initial installation came from those physical CDs, the number of people who wanted to play that game could ensure that you did not get a copy of that game if you didn't take the time to pre-order and pay for it in advance. So there was a purpose to pre-ordering. Plus, if you think about it, back in the day, you know, even as little as 2 decades ago, games tend to be more stable when they shipped anyway. That's partially because games were smaller, had smaller teams, smaller budgets, weren't nearly as ambitious. So because of their smaller scope, games tended to be more stable, less buggy, and where the games were so focused could be more fun. So pre-ordering also held with it a lot less risk than it does today. You could pre-order a video game, so like a Super Nintendo game, but you could be assured that the game would work for the most part. There was very few in the way of game-breaking bugs back in the day when you really think about it. And because physical media ensured that publishers and developers only really got one chance to release a game, they kind of had to make them stable. While patching in video games has been around for, God, decades now, it was only in the last, I'd say, number of years that, patching has become just an integral part of the video game process. The original StarCraft had patches, but they didn't have a launcher, and they weren't built into the launcher where you would automatically download them when they came out. So you as a player might hear of patches, but may not know where to get them, how to install them. I mean, I was 11 when StarCraft came out. I didn't know how to use computers that well. So when a new StarCraft patch came out, I was pretty ignorant as to how I was supposed to get them and use them, and whether or not they were even worth the time and trouble it took to install them. So publishers kind of had to make sure that the games that came out were as stable as humanly possible. There's very few games that came out that were glitchless, but how often did you hear of a game coming out and being utterly broken as they are today? And I do believe this is partially because publishers know they can release a game that's kind of broken and they can fix it later. And with the advent of No Man's Sky, or Final Fantasy XIV, some of them now believe they can release utterly broken games and then build something playable from them over time. So pre-ordering did have a purpose as well as less risk attached to it. So let's flash forward to the modern day. When was the last time any of you held a physical, PC game in your hands, right? You go to EB Games now, and I think if there is a PC shelf at all, it's like this big. Like there's like 3 games on it and nothing else. Even though console games do still have the kind of case you can open and grab CDs out of, the moment you put that CD in an Xbox or a PlayStation, the first thing you're gonna do is download a patch. And because you can download the whole game online anyway, there really is no purpose to this physical thing anymore other than to say I have it or that I own it. So with the move of all media going online, and that includes everything from movies and music, not just video games, we've seen less and less in the way of a need to pre-order anything. In the sense of there's no need to hold copies anymore. They can't run out of copies of a WoW expansion. The physical thing doesn't exist anymore. So why is there a need to pre-order at all anymore? Well, game publishers and developers quickly realized that as we moved into more online space, all that money and revenue that they were used to having before a game ever released was starting to dry up. Even though there was a purpose to pre-orders, all companies still wanted money up front, because let's face it, it's always good to have money before you even have to deliver the product, right? So companies, even though they were losing the pre-order revenue, still wanted it, but now they could no longer rely on the fact that people needed those physical copies in order to ensure that they got that revenue. So with that revenue stream drying up, and with games becoming more complicated and more buggy, and they were facing the reality that they had to release stable games as much as humanly possible on release, or else they would never sell further copies, publishers and developers started developing ways of trying to get people to pre-order the game despite the fact there was no need to actually do it anymore. So enter pre-order bonuses, where publishers would reward you in some way, either with cosmetics or some sort of in-game content, to purchase a game before it released, even though there was no longer a need to do so. So I remember Alien Isolation, and there was a DLC that had you play as Ripley and the original crew from the first movie, and that only got released as part of a special edition. But there was a further DLC that you actually could not play unless you pre-purchased the game. So without that pre-order, you actually were now unable to play this whole section of the game, which is again how they enticed you to do a pre-order despite the fact that the actual purpose of pre-orders had vanished. Now that was an extreme case, and the typical pre-order bonuses are mostly cosmetic. The point being that companies are now relying on bonuses to ensure that you give them money up front. Now this alone isn't in itself a problem. If you want to risk the money on buying a game before you know whether it's good, in the name of getting some pre-order bonuses, that's not a huge deal. But let's face it, in the last few years, how many big budget AAA games have come out that had all this hype surrounding them, and they were just broken? One that was personal to me, for example, is Warcraft 3. I had played Warcraft 3 in the past, and I was excited to see some of the things that they said was going to be in this remake that they were going to release. Everything from new cinematics to new character models. I think they even said they were going to update some maps. It all sounded great. And then, as a pre-order incentive, anyone who pre-ordered the game also got these cosmetics for a bunch of other Blizzard games. As a World of Warcraft player, I would have gotten a meat wagon mount. However, Warcraft 3 releases, and it ends up being the lowest rated game on Metacritic. The cinematics they said were going to be in it didn't exist. They just weren't there. And funnily enough, if you went on the Blizzard site to look at the game, it was advertising the game using the cinematics that were not in the game. So if I had pre-ordered the game, I could now have my meat wagon that I could now ride around Azeroth with in World of Warcraft, and basically I could shout from the top of it, hey everybody, I spent $70 on an absolutely shit game, and now I can show that I spent that kind of money with my shit mount, so I can show my buyer's remorse to everybody on this game. I mean, that's just one example. Then you have things like Fallout 76, which also released in a state that was pretty unacceptable. But even more funny of the audacity they had with their pre-orders. Fallout 76 release trailer happened, I think, at the end of a 24-hour Twitch stream that they had done. But the trailer didn't actually tell you what kind of game it was. I would assume that most people who saw it would assume it was a new Fallout game. In the same vein as Fallout 3, 4, New Vegas. So just a new game in the series, an RPG. However, there were rumors that this game was going to be more of a survival-based thing, but nobody knew for certain. And the trailer that was released at the end of their stream didn't really show anything. It was obviously an announcement trailer, some graphics or anything, but no gameplay. But at the end of the trailer, they still said, follow this link and you can pre-order. They were asking you for money before they even told you what you would be paying your money for. Is it going to be a RPG? Who knows? Is it going to be survival? Who knows? Hell, it could be some sort of weird Fallout 76 soccer game you wouldn't be able to tell until after you saw an actual trailer. But here, give us the $70 in advance anyway, because hey, we're Bethesda. So I don't know how many people bought into this pre-ordering thing for Fallout 76 before it came out, but I can guarantee you anybody who paid money to it basically had buyer's remorse when the thing came out. It was not good by any stretch of imagination. I believe it's in a better state now, but it certainly wasn't good when it came out. And from then, we've just had failure after failure when it comes to initial releases. I remember as a big Mass Effect fan how disappointed I was to hear about Andromeda being a failure at launch. And I was someone who had thought about pre-ordering it because I was a huge fan of the Mass Effect series. And I had believed BioWare wouldn't allow anything that was subpar to be released into the field. But here we were, pre-order bonus or no pre-order bonus. The fact of the matter is they were asking me for $70 to $80 for a game that barely worked. And since the game released, they have made updates to it. So in this particular case, I was better off playing the game years later when it was on sale on Steam than I ever was playing the game when it first came out. And the final heavy disappointment when it comes to this is frankly Cyberpunk 2077. Again, I held off. I didn't pre-order despite seeing trailers of this game for years and being so hyped up for it. I wasn't sure if it was going to be the revolutionary game that they were kind of making it out to be during its advertising campaign, but I thought it would be an absolutely fantastic game. But I held off on pre-ordering because of everything from Andromeda and Fallout 76 that I didn't want to touch the Cyberpunk pre-order until I knew the game was going to be good. And while there's PC players that said the game was fine, anybody who pre-ordered on console are finding out the hard way that it was not worth $20, let alone the $70 they probably paid for it. And this is to say nothing of Anthem, a game that also released in a very, very bad state. A game that I personally also thought about pre-ordering because I was so worried about BioWare going under, and frankly I still am, because of the failure of Andromeda. And I had wanted to pre-purchase just so I could give BioWare money because I was terrified of what would happen if this game ended up being a flop. I didn't pre-order at the time due to financial reasons, and obviously I'm glad I didn't. Despite some of the amazing graphical work and the flight that was amazing in the game, the reality of the situation was the game was a failure on launch. And anyone who paid $70 for it quickly found out that it wasn't worth the money. I played the beta, I wasn't impressed. So if I wasn't impressed, why would I have paid money for it beforehand? And I ended up saving myself a lot of frustration and heartache. Even though it was a failure, there were still people that were really big on Anthem and have kept playing it throughout the last couple of years. And they all just got their hearts broken by saying that the new Anthem Next was not going to come out. So that $70 they dumped into the game, and they never did get a good game out the other end. Nope, they didn't put enough patches or content in it to make it worth the money they initially charged you for. And I really think that's the crime that we need to, as gamers, really understand and need to counteract a little bit here. There are no publishers anymore that that have the goodwill that I would trust them to release fantastic games on launch day. So we've got BioWare out, Blizzard out, EA's out, and now even CD Projekt Red, who, social controversies aside, still had a lot of goodwill built up because of things like The Witcher and good old games. We thought if anybody was going to give us a fantastic initial experience, it would be them. And they didn't. The game is certainly not worth the hype that they put into it. And part of that simply is they know that they can release broken-ass games on launch day and still get a ton of money from it because of pre-orders. And because of games like No Man's Sky and Final Fantasy XIV that released in very unplayable states, whether because of the games are broken or because they didn't deliver on half the promises they made, but then the companies that made them took responsibility and continue to work on to create versions of the game that are worth playing today. Companies now believe that they can do that with just about anything. Because when Anthem came out, they said, that's it, we're doing Anthem next, we're going to rebuild this game from the ground up to make it what we promised it would be. They didn't. When Valve released Artifact, it came out with very, very little positive reviews to its name. They said they were going to fix it. They didn't. So this hope that I think some players have that even if they pre-purchase a game and it ends up being bad, that it will one day be good, isn't a guarantee anymore. The reality of the situation is that developers are telling us to give them our money, our hard-earned money, before we know whether the product is worth purchasing. And in so many cases in the last couple years, it hasn't been. and yet we still continue as gamers to get suckered in by hype or by the promise of some sort of cosmetic bonuses that come out the other end. I'm a gamer, guys. I know what it's like to feel hype. I remember watching all those cinematic trailers for Battle for Azeroth, the WoW expansion previous to the one that we are currently in. I had bought so hard into the hype, and it ends up being probably the second worst expansion in the entire game. So I get it. I know what it's like to be hyped, and I know what it's like to want to play a game the day that it comes out. But I feel that we have been burned way too many times in the past to keep giving these companies these free passes. We're already having trouble justifying the $70 price tag on games, let alone giving them the money up front when we can't even see what the games are like, if they are worth the money and time that we need to invest into them. I mean, think about it. BioWare made millions of dollars off Anthem and never ever finished building a good game out of it. And they did this by asking for money up front or relying on player hype to finance a game that ended up never being what they promised it would be. And that's just one example. We look at Fallout 76, we look at Warcraft 3, and neither of these are in a state that people will look back and say, I'm glad I spent the money on this. Minus a few people, of course. There are always people that will either lie to themselves or genuinely enjoy these games that most other people can't say that they enjoy. But just think about it. Even if you only take Warcraft 3, Anthem, Fallout, and Cyberpunk, like, we're already talking over $300 spent on games that weren't worth it. And if we as gamers continuously give these companies money before they actually deliver a working product, we're partially to blame for all of these broken games that are coming out. Why would a developer put so much work into making something great when they know that we're going to give them money anyway? And you can't even say, well, if they do such a bad job, then we won't give them their money ever again. Again, Andromeda comes out and it's garbage at launch. Garbage. And there were so many people that probably got burned on that $70 pre-order, and yet still Anthem comes out and they make a ton of money. And I can guarantee you, when the next Mass Effect game comes out, people will pre-order the living crap out of that as well, and might still end up being burned, and on this particular case, it would be the third time from the same company. So seriously, guys, you need to consider not buying into the hype. Don't get suckered in by fancy cosmetics. Do not give a game company money until they can prove the product is worth it. And yes, sometimes games are released in great states. There are those rare gems like the Doom series, Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, which release in very good states that require minimal patching after release. But we need to understand that that is now the rarity, not the rule. So let's take a step back, and before you decide to pre-order a game, just consider waiting. Wait for reviews. Wait for the general public to comment on them. Wait to watch a YouTuber or a Twitch streamer like me play the game before you make a decision to purchase the game and spend your hard-earned dollars on something you may regret. In so few other industries do we pay for stuff before we hear about how good it is. Why are we not following that same attitude with video games? So please, if you take anything away from this video, I can't tell you never to pre-order a game again, but at least take a step back before you do and think about it. Is it really worth the risk to pre-purchase this game now before I know whether the company will deliver on its promises that it made when advertising this game? But with that, I'm going to leave this video here. My name is Naxius. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving a like, leaving a comment, or subscribing to the channel. Also, you can check me out on Twitch and YouTube. I do stream almost every night of the week. Links will be in the description down below. Thanks again, everyone, for watching, and I will see you later. See ya.